Welcome back everyone. Today I'm just going to make a little video talking about the topic of muted or muting strings, which if you're a beginner is probably a problem that you're all far too familiar with. So in this video I'll go over the main reasons why you might struggle to get the notes to ring out nicely, and then of course the quick and easy fixes to solve the issue. And then after that I'll go over why you might actually want to mute the strings and teach you a little bit about that. So it'll be a nice chill video today, but as usual, let's get to it. So when I talk about muted strings, I'm referring to the issue of not being able to get the strings to ring out nicely and get a nice and clean tone. So maybe it's sounding a bit like this, maybe it's the actual string that you're playing and pressing down isn't coming out nicely, or maybe you're actually pressing on other strings and blocking them instead. So I think there's two reasons for muted strings. Number one is the actual pressing down of the string. You're not pressing hard enough, or maybe you're not holding it close enough to the fret. So if you do find that your problem is you can't hold down properly and that's why you're getting the buzzing, then there's two things that I recommend you do. So number one is to make sure you're pressing down hard enough, and maybe it is a matter of hand strength or specific guitar hand strength, which will just come over practice, so bear with and just keep pushing yourself and eventually you'll get the strength, or it might just be general weak hand strength, which maybe you need to train that, but I don't think so. Then the second thing you're going to do, if it's the buzzing when you're actually pressing down, is make sure your finger is as close as you can get it to the fret, closest to the guitar body. So you don't want it down here, away from the fret. If you're playing the third fret, you want it to be as close to that third fret as possible. So just bring the finger up and that should fix the problem. Now the other reason why you might be getting buzzing or muted strings might be because you're pressing down without knowing, or maybe you do know but you just can't fix it. You might be pressing down on the other strings and therefore not letting them ring out properly. So that's the main type of string buzzing that I will be covering in this video, and the following tips will help you to fix it. So without further ado, let's get to tip one. So the first and main reason why you might be muting the strings unintentionally is just because you're not bending your finger enough, and instead it's flat and covering the strings without wanting to. So the key concept here, and the thing you kind of want to aim for, is to get nice curved fingers which loop over the fretboard rather than just straight ones which can block strings. And up until now you may have been struggling with the problem of muted strings but not really knowing why, so this step alone could fix it now that you know you need to bend your fingers rather than keeping straight fingers. So if that was the issue, there you go, problem solved. But if it's not, then keep watching and maybe the rest will solve it. Now tip two, kind of building off of that last point, is to make sure you stay right on the point and the fingertip of your finger. So instead of having a flat finger, which I see some beginners do, like they'll put the pad of their finger down almost, you want to stay on the tip of your finger, as this will have the smallest area, so therefore the smaller chance of hitting the other strings that you don't want to. So in other words, if you stay on the tip of your finger, you'll have more precision and accuracy and will just stay more tight and compact. Now tip number three, again building off of the last point, is you might actually just need to cut your fingernails. And that's because in order to go on the tip of your finger you obviously need shorter nails, and whilst some guitarists do have longer nails on their right hand for actually plucking the strings, like all guitarists generally need shorter nails on their left hand in order to go on the tip and hit the strings accurately. So yeah, if you are struggling to actually physically get on the tip of your finger, then you might just need to cut your nails. So go cut your nails and come back and try again. You never know, might solve it. And then leading on from that point, if you've cut your nails but you still can't press down, and maybe it's hurting to press down, then again I think there's two reasons for this. Number one is just you're a beginner and your fingers generally hurt to press down on the strings. But number two, maybe if you are more intermediate and you've been playing for a bit longer, you might kind of get some nerve pain, which I've had a bit of in the past, but I think it's just from either practicing too much or pressing down down too hard. So relax when you're playing, and you really don't need to press down that hard. So maybe if you are, putting too much force in it, take a breather, relax, and again, it should solve the issue. Alright, now tip 4, and this kind of brings all the other tips together, is you really do just need to stay relaxed. And I know as a beginner you might have a tendency to try and brute force your way through playing the guitar and almost treat it as a challenge that you just need to conquer it, but really relax and it should be comfortable in your arms. So looking back at those other tips, try and think about where you feel tension in your hands when you're playing. So if you are just struggling to get a chord to ring out nicely, like maybe a few of the strings just aren't ringing out properly, then you might just need to be mindful of the tension in your fingers. Because whilst now you might be really tensed up trying to hit those positions as best as you can, I think almost counterintuitively, if you just relax and release, you'll find your fingers are much more supple and flexible and are able to play the notes that you want to with a lot less effort and resistance. So now that we've addressed the issue of muted strings and how to go about fixing that, I'm actually going to talk about why you might want to mute the strings and how it can make your playing sound better. And the key reason why you'd actually want to intentionally go about muting strings is to eliminate the notes that you don't actually want to play, and therefore you'll get a cleaner sound because you'll only be playing the notes that actually fit into that space of sound, and you'll cut out all the junk notes that you don't really want but just kind of happen to be there but don't really need to be. So a really common example of this is you might want to mute the E string perhaps with your thumb whilst you're playing other chords which don't require this E string. Now my guitar's in a different tuning at the moment, so I can't demonstrate any of the standard chords that you'll want to use this technique for, but I'll mention them in a minute. So I'll just demonstrate with this one chord what I mean. So who knows what this chord is? It doesn't matter. But the idea is, this is what the chord's supposed to sound like. Okay, it's nice and clean, but if I was to put that E string in, which I don't want to because kind of clashes, it would sound like this. See, it's just a bit murkier and not as clean as that. And the reason for why you might not want this note is simply it just doesn't belong in the chord. Other reasons might be you want a crisper and lighter tone with just the higher strings, and you don't want this bass because it will ruin the crisper sound that you're going for. But some other examples of chords where this muted technique would work well are things like an A minor chord where you don't want the E string because the E doesn't belong to the A minor, or maybe a C where you don't want that either, and D's because one, you don't want the E string, and also you might just want the higher notes. And I'd say there's two main ways to go about doing this. The first way would be to use your thumb. So say if you were doing a D chord, you just curve the thumb over so it's gently touching the string. As you can see, it's muted. So you just gently curve it over, and same for a C chord. I want to gently curve it over. A minor, curve it over. And that will be, it might be unnatural to start, but over time it will become a habit. And then the second way is if you don't want to mute the E string, but maybe you want to mute some of the other strings lower down where your thumb won't reach. And the way you do this is now you do want to have a flatter finger. So you remember how I said if you want to not mute it, you have a bent finger. Well, now if you want to mute it, you have a flat finger. Now, I can't think of any specific chords where this would be applicable, but there are many occasions when it's useful, is you just play the notes but almost roll onto your pad. Again, what I said not to do to avoid the muted strings, now you're going to do it. So we'll roll onto the pad, almost straighten the finger, and that will mute like the string below, or if you roll a bit more, the two strings below. Now you might be thinking, come on bro, it's not that deep, just don't play the string that you don't want to. Why do you need to mute it? Firstly, it's not that easy to avoid hitting certain strings, especially when you're doing really big strumming movements. And also, you might not realise it, but when you do play notes, all of the strings will vibrate because it's coming out of the guitar. And you can even try this yourself if you maybe just played the bottom 5 strings and then muted them, you probably still hear the top string ringing out even though you never played it. So I'll try and demonstrate, but it might not work or you might not pick it up. So just try it yourself. So yeah, as you can hear, whilst it is subtle, at the end of the day, the note is still there. So you might as well mute the strings and then you'll get rid of that sound and have a much nicer tone. And now one last point for why you'd want to mute the strings is there's a whole range of little percussion techniques that you can use which involve muting the strings. So one example could be to partially mute the strings when you're strumming to give it a bit more rhythm and texture, almost an oomph. So maybe if you were... Now, as you can see, I'm not too good at that technique because I don't really use it that much in my playing, but if you are interested in rhythmic guitar, for instance, then it might be a really good one to implement. Now, another technique that I personally haven't really used, but I've seen a whole load of other people do, is almost an individual plucked muted string type of thing in a rhythm, like... And this is especially prominent in like rhythm guitar, or maybe guitar with lots of licks and scales and cool stuff. And also in John Mayer's Neon, he uses this quite a lot to just get some percussion, but whilst still playing the notes. So yeah. And then the last percussion technique, which is all out, completely muted, and I do use this myself, is like muting the strings like this. And as I've mentioned before in my cover of Believer by Imagine Dragons, it used this quite a lot in the intro. And the way you do this is you get your fingers, touch them on the strings, don't press down because then you'll start to play the notes and that's not exactly muted. So put your fingers gently on and you just do that. And that's also really good for practicing strumming patterns, because you don't have to worry about what chords you're actually playing and you can just isolate the technique and then add it into the chords later. So there you go, I tried to keep this video nice and snappy. Now I won't do an elaborate outro because my voice is dying, I'm dying, I want to go to bed. So thank you for watching, like, comment, subscribe, tell me videos you want me to make. Watch? No, hang on. Oh, hang on, let me think about this. Oh, I don't know. It's too late for this. Click this side somewhere. And yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'm just gonna yeah. So without further ado, let's get to step. Now step and then mute them. No, that didn't work because you don't have to worry about because